Welcome to Senior Living Marketing Perspectives. I'm Debbie Howard from Senior Living Smart, and today we are welcoming Brian Massey, who is the founder of Conversion Sciences. So, welcome, Brian.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Absolutely. So, I was fortunate enough to attend your virtual session as we've been in our virtual world for the last year at the latest SMASH conference. And it was great. I took lots of notes and I really enjoyed, what you were sharing. And I thought, oh, Brian would be a great guest to share kind of experience and thought leadership with our audience. So thanks for joining.
I'm happy to be here. I'm glad you found it valuable.
Yeah, it's interesting because we always talk about the art and science of sales and marketing, and I think we do a lot on the art side. We talk a lot about whether it's copy and messaging and persona development and images and video and all of those aspects. But there's so much great information in the data. And I love that. I love your approach to science and really looking at hypothesis and then
hmm
testing them out, and not just willy nilly going down rabbit holes, but really holding ourselves to account to make sure that there's a process in place. So I know we'll talk about that. But just to kick us off, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and conversion sciences?
Well, I am a computer scientist by training, so that's why I get to wear the swanky lab coat and stuff. Um, but when I was in college, I happened to upon a IBM sales guy with the white shirt and the red tie and the blue blazer, and I was like, I wonder if I could do that. So when I left college, I actually went into sales. I worked for Texas Instruments doing technical sales. Rose to my highest level of incompetence in that, and started my own business. Got back into the software side of things, and my first business in the '90s was software consulting.
Mhm.
Uh, .com bust took out a few of our customers, which took us out, and I started into marketing because
Mhm.
I had enough opinions about that. Um, and it was at a really interesting business school here in Austin called the Wizard Academy that I was introduced to conversion optimization. At the time, everybody wants conversion. Everybody wants people coming to their website and turning into leads and sales. But we didn't have this vocabulary and this set of disciplines around it. So I said, that's probably the best combination of a computer scientist, salesperson, marketing person, entrepreneur. There's really nothing else I could have become but a conversion scientist. So I bought a lab coat and started consulting, and that was in 2007. So I guess you could say the rest is history. Now we've worked with dozens and dozens of companies, showing them how to design their website with data such that their visitors are getting what they're looking for and feeling comfortable and confident taking action, becoming a lead, buying something, whatever the goal is.
Yeah, that's interesting because a lot of people will say we just need more leads. I'm like, no, you need more conversions. Let's, what should be keeping us up at night is the traffic that has intent. We've driven them to the website. Something as specific as senior living is not something you stumble upon by accident. There's an intent and a motivation.
hmm
There's a search process that leads you there. And we're spending all this money driving traffic and AdWords and Facebook. And we finally get them to the website. And then we start looking at things like bounce rate. And we look at, time on page. And then we look at what they're, where we're losing them, or, looking at landing pages, even more intent, right? So we
hmm
finally get them to a landing page, which is going to be our holy grail of conversion. And, that could be, download our brochure, or look at this great ebook, or schedule a visit.
hmm
All those actions that we want them to take to get that coveted contact information so that we can then nurture and advance. And then we look at it and we'll say, gosh, 1,200 people viewed our landing page and 37 filled it out.
If you even know those numbers, most people don't work with those numbers and know how many people are coming to a particular page. They just see that, well, not very many people are filling out the form.
Right. And then, but then you don't know what to do with the information, right? So, people aren't filling it out. But I think to what you're talking about is, there's probably, I know you talk a lot about behavioral science.
Hmm.
And, maybe you can tell us a little bit about that to get into the head of the prospect to say, they researched assisted living or dementia care or whatever they're in need of. They have motivation, they have intent. We, yay, get them to the website. What are they looking for? Is it still that 8-second rule where we have such a short amount of time for them to really understand what we do and to give them an option and how they want to engage with us? But maybe you can take us into the kind of the heart and mind of the prospect that has that level of intent, that has that need, that gets there, and those that kind of progress and take an action and engage, and those that just they come and go, or they abandon a landing page, or they just bounce without taking an action.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you mentioned bounce rate, so let's talk about that a little bit. This is what we put in the category of engagement metrics. So, and bounce rate is actually a better measure of the quality of the traffic you're bringing to the site.
Okay.
So there's this constant tension between, do we need more traffic or do we need to make our landing experiences better? You can be bringing good quality traffic and have a terrible landing experience, and it'll look like you have a high bounce rate. Um, but someone who's qualified will generally spend a little bit more time on your site. So the bounce rate's a better measure of how good your traffic is than the quality of your landing experiences. Um, Within all of these engagement metrics, like bounce rate and time on site and pages per visit, there's not necessarily a correlation between increasing those and actually increasing your conversion rates. So you want to make sure that if you're looking at those metrics, that there is a correlation, which is a fairly easy little analysis to do. In general, though, when we're talking about behavioral science, what we have the opportunity to do here is understand our visitors while they're in the decision. That's what an analytics database is all about. It's how people are behaving when they're trying to solve this problem. And in this case, this is a major life-changing emotional event for the most part. Um, how are they behaving when they're in the middle of this? And so we call it behavioral science. Sometimes that sounds a little bit scary. Somebody who's running a facility or managing a website is like, I mean, that's outside of my pay grade. But if you're counting on the web to drive your business, you can't manage it without having access to this sort of data. And the benefits are sometimes seem a little bit elusive. You talked earlier about how this is art and science, but the data actually allows you to expand your art, to be more creative. If you have some ideas that are creative, there's ways to collect data to see if that idea is really a good idea. Put a page up that has this new approach to the copy or a new positioning statement, or focuses on one particular aspect of your facility or your offering, your service, and see how that works. So we have a lot more freedom to be creative if we're spending enough time, or at least asking our agency or asking our team for the data that backs up that sort of thing. So people often see them as opposite. I'm going to be either more creative and arty, or I'm going to be more data driven. But in fact, data allows you to be more creative, and that's probably the most exciting thing to me about this whole business.
So if we are not spending as much time looking at the bounce rate, time on pages consumed, all of that, what is the data that we should be looking at that informs those more artful, strategic conversations?
Yeah. Well, I think those are the first bits of data you should be asking your agency for. So you say, all right, we're doing this campaign. We are going out on Facebook. We're going to run these ads, and it's driving to this landing page, and then we're going to see how many leads or inquiries we get. You should be asking your agency, number one, how are we going to judge this page? what is the primary call to action is typically the best way.
Mhm.
How many visits are you driving? How many conversions are we getting? Um, Asking them for the data helps you manage that relationship intelligently. We've all gotten stuff back from our agencies or from our creative teams and been like, is this really going to work? I wouldn't have done this, but we've got confirmation bias going on in our heads. We could be thinking of that from our standpoint, which would be
Mhm.
completely different from somebody who's in the middle of this question. Um, so ask for the data. Say, all right, well, tell me how this is performing. We've gotten a month or a few weeks into this campaign. How is this performing? And manage those relationships based on that. You don't have to be in analytics to do that. Let them do that. A lot of agencies will look at you crazy, like, "Oh, we don't know how to do that." But you want an agency that knows how to do that. So either they need to learn it, or you need a different agency. So that, I mean, those are, it's really not too much rocket science. Now, if you have a page that is performing poorly, there are other tools that will show you exactly how people are interacting with the page. So we use a lot of a tool called Hotjar.
Right.
Crazy Egg is popular. These produce heat maps of how far people are scrolling on the page, where their mouse is moving on the page, and where they're clicking on the page. So you can really see if there's a drop off at some point in the page that would make that section of content suspect, like, oh, this is where we're losing them. If people are clicking on things that aren't clickable, well, maybe we can make that clickable and bring them to a form or bring them to the next step in their decision making process. If they're not clicking on the things that you want them to click on, well,
Mhm.
maybe the design needs to elevate that visually, make it more obvious. Or we need to put some sort of a signal in there that they should be clicking on this as that next step. Um, these again are tools that ride underneath your site. They collect data from people actually in the question on your site and can be really powerful. So you should be asking your development teams, your agencies for this data. And if they don't have the skill, they need to get up to speed on the skill of providing those sorts of analysis.
It's amazing how many tools there are. Hotjar is great. We love to use that to watch the experience, and then, even recording live sessions and
Yeah.
actually observing, a real user while they're on your site and where they're going. And I think you could probably go crazy watching them, like click that.
Yeah.
but and then also hiring users just to have certain experiences, like can you find this piece of information. There are companies out there that will actually hire people to do these kind of audits where you bring 10 prospective folks to your website, and then you give them a series of tasks to see how easy it is to do, and then watching them will often inform you of like, wow, maybe that should have been here instead of there, or in the nav instead of on the scroll. Do you
Yeah.
find those helpful as well?
Very helpful. We have a lot of what we call palm to forehead moments when we're watching those, like, because you really can't read the label when you're inside the bottle, and
Yeah.
you're too close to it yourself. Our our brains are these just lumps of biases that cause us to make choices based on what we prefer, based on what we think has worked in the past, and cause us to take shortcuts when we're trying to decide between things. If an agency comes to you with a new design and says, we have these three mock-ups, pick the one that you want to go with, you should say, no, go out and use one of these panels. Tools like usertesting.com, Validately is one that we use. Go out, bring a panel of people to look at it and see which of them can complete the task most successfully, or which of them can find what the next step is on this page. Collect some data to help me decide which one of these is most likely to convert. Again, you're improving your relationship with the agency, you're improving your site, and the data is in these tools are not expensive. They can all be run from your desk. You don't have to go out and do focus groups and hire rooms and facilitators. Just put together some smart scripts and watch them use it, and you'll be surprised.
Yeah, it's fascinating to watch. And then I'm just wondering about designing the websites. Today prospects can't get in to see the communities for the most part. We're recording this in early December of 2020.
Yep.
We're all anxious for the vaccine and when we can, start having more interactions. But right now, for a lot of the communities, they're not able to do any of those on-site, events, interactions, relationship building. So really, the only front door is the digital front door and the digital experience. So, have you seen, a shift to maybe try some new strategies, or how would you recommend that people adapt their website to maybe replace some of those interactions that used to happen, face to face in the community more relationally? And now it's not that the prospects still don't want that information and that experience, but we have to deliver it in a different way.
Yeah. So I'm a little bit surprised that I'm not seeing more of a shift. And so the solutions are using video, using 3D tours and things like this. And this content is more expensive to develop. The production costs are higher than putting words on a landing page. And I think it seems, I might be reading into it, but it seems that people are like, okay, well, we just need to get through this and get as many leads as we can, rather than we need to fundamentally shift our online approach to incorporating more video, um, more of these walkthroughs, that sort of thing that can, because what you want to do on the website is give someone a feeling for what it's going to be like to take action. So what will it be like when I complete this form? I'll get some emails, I'll get a call. What will it feel like when I have this tour? And then the tour allows them to understand what it's going to feel like to have their loved one or to be living in this facility. Well, now we've got to get all the way through that on the web. So we've got to be using more of these more expensive content approaches. And again, there's data to be collected on these sorts of things. As you start to test, for instance, a video tour of the site, how many people are playing that? That's a little bit of data that you can collect. How far into the video are they getting? Is it too long? Is it too short? And are you making calls to action in that? Um, uh, in that scenario, creating urgency and things like that. So again, this is the teams that are producing this content for you. Every one of them, you should be asking, how are we going to know if this is successful? What are going to be the metrics that we're looking at, and can you give me that on a weekly, monthly basis? How often you want to be evaluating that campaign? As we're beginning to sober up to exactly how long this is going to be the case, and there's going to be entire segments that even after we've defeated the virus are going to prefer to do it all online. How are we redesigning our sites? And the rub is this: we have this concept of website is that we put it up, we have somebody design it for us, and then that's our website for the next few years. We're trying very hard to change the world. That's not the way to design. We put up a website, and then as markets change, as our products change, as ideas come in, we're changing the site. It's growing. And when we look at metrics like bounce rate, time on site, pages per visit, we're more interested in how we're changing those than what the actual number is. Everybody's always asking, like, what are the industry standards for these values? Well, the best standard is that your bounce rate is lower than it was yesterday. Your time on site is higher than it was yesterday. That's what these metrics really help you do, is to know as you're evolving your site, changing it for the markets, that you're improving all of these things.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about kind of designing a site that's going to attract your first-time visitors that may be, in awareness, research kind of stage. And then also, have a website that people will come back to often through consideration and decision. Because I don't know about you, but I see a lot of websites that assume that somebody is in the decision phase when they get to your website. And the only call to action is a sales qualified call to action. Would you like to schedule a tour? how about scheduling a tour here? Would you like to schedule a tour there? It's like the only thing they have is just, we want you to schedule a tour. And there are a whole lot of people on the website, probably the majority of the people, that may not yet be ready for that sales interaction.
Hmm.
So what are you finding in developing that website that is a great one for the first early stage people to educate and help them feel comfortable, but also remain anonymous? Maybe people want to self-serve a little bit longer, they want to get information on their own, they expect transparency, and then how do you also get them to keep coming back and seeing your website as that great resource that throughout their journey continues to add value?
Yeah, it's so this is, I think, where the data is really helpful, because you have to be creative in this. So, this is an emotional event that is often triggered by a fall, an automobile accident, just the state that a loved one is living in as they age and maybe are unable to take care of themselves. Um, Oftentimes the loved one does not want to be taken out of their home. The children, the adult children, are avoiding this decision, but they know that they have to do something. So there's this constant resistance. How do you creatively um, come up with a voice and a series of messages that inch them closer to a tour, or to that next step conversation with a salesperson, that sort of thing? It takes empathy and creativity, and you only get to that iteratively. So you try some things that you think will work, you measure how they work, you try to improve on that. So the playbook for this is people who come to the site get pixeled and can be retargeted and reminded through social media, through search advertising, some display advertising, getting those little compassionate, understanding messages in front of them so that it eases their sense of, their sense of guilt.
Mhm.
Oftentimes for the adult children of aging parents, it's guilt and fear.
Yeah.
Um, uh, when they come to the site, there are offers that are very functional, like 6 things to consider when selecting a home care scenario.
Mhm.
Um, you might want to test some things that are more like how to have that conversation with your parent, things like that are really hitting at some of those more emotional things.
Mhm.
And what you'll find is that there's a certain number of touches, a certain number of exposures that are necessary for someone to feel like, okay, I think this is one of the ones I would want to explore more. Um, and there is also that reduction of resistance, and we can do that through email, and we can do that through, to some extent, through ads, compassionate ads, and we want to mix that with calls to action, scarcity, getting them to take action, getting past their resistance, a little bit more traditional act now sort of things.
Mhm.
Although I would not recommend that copy necessarily in this situation,
Right.
but it's the same sentiment that we want to generate. So um, the 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 solutions really depend on kind of your brand and how you run your facility and how you expose that value proposition over time. And the only way to know what's working is through this behavioral data.
And what's the best way for, I'm thinking people listening right now going, how am I going to get this data? Where does this data exist?
Yeah. So again, if you're managing the digital part of the business, you cannot manage your business without this data. You can't manage a physical store without being to walk through and see how your sales reps are doing and seeing how people are walking through the store and looking at the quality of the displays. It's the same on the web. This
Yeah.
is now a tantamount to your business. And if you're, covering your ears and hiding from this because you're afraid of Google Analytics, then get a team that knows how to answer your questions on the campaigns and the pages that you're using. But you can't run this business without using data to make decisions.
Right. Yeah, I absolutely agree. It's so important. So we've already talked about that, what we're what we're representing is not transactional in nature. It's much more relational and emotional. Um, and then we're also trying to create, a site that speaks to two different audiences, right? So we have like the adult child, and they tend to be like, I want lots of information. I want to make an informed decision. I want to make sure my loved one is safe. I'm going to be well cared for, and I kind of have this checklist of information I want. And then the older adult themselves, that's like, where am I going to live? What am I going to do? What's my day in the life going to be? Am I going to have fun? Am I going to have independence and choice? And so those audiences are really very different in terms of their what's most important in the messaging that they're going to
Mm-hmm.
kind of relate to. So I'm beginning to see, and you may also, people trying to get people to pick a door, door number one or door number two to get to from the homepage, to kind of personalize the rest of their interaction on the website based on their role or persona. Have you seen that kind of an approach work, or do you think that there just has to be enough content kind of strategically created for each audience that people are going to see themselves? Or do you really see a very distinct segmentation and actually taking people on different journeys based on that selection?
Yeah, and conversion optimization really is an assembling of segments. So you start with your biggest segments. Personas are a great tool for understanding what those segments are. One of the things that we miss in our personas is how we would understand if this person was on our website.
Mm-hmm.
So, as you become more sophisticated with your site, you're going to have offers targeted at specific segments. The adult children, the senior living that would rather live in their home. They're the seniors coming that are like, I need more social interaction. I'm looking forward to this. So you're going to
Yeah.
have these different personalities. And so you'll have content that appeals to those individually. And when they go to that part of the site, you really are starting to design those pages specifically for those messages. And analytics is beginning to track which people are going to those sorts of pages. So in analytics, you can begin to see these different segments and how they behave differently, which offers they reply most to, what content they're most likely to give you a name and an email address for, so
Mm-hmm.
that you can begin people call it a drip or a nurturing campaign. I like to think of those as education and entertainment campaigns.
Yeah.
No one wants to be nurtured, maybe by your mom, but
Yeah.
we want to be educated and entertained. And so that's what those are really targeted at.
Yeah.
So you can start to tease out these segments. We do our best to understand on the existing side if we can see evidence of these different segments. Oftentimes, your analytics will tell you demographics, so you know where they're coming from. You can get an estimate of the age for a large percentage of them in Google Analytics, because so
Mm-hmm.
many people are logged into Google Analytics. And that begins to help you segment these out, and so you can start collecting data specifically on those things. Again, it's you don't have to be a data scientist to ask a question like, all right, now, so what are the major age groups, and of those age groups, what pages do they seem to favor? So you can build on that and emphasize that the most. I think that one of the mistakes that we make in terms of nurturing these relationships is not sending enough email. So we think that everyone's going to see every email that we sent, and they're going to get frustrated because we're sending too much email.
Right.
But if people are seeing only 1 in 3, 1 in 4, 1 in 5 of your emails, and you're sending once a month, well, you're getting a couple contacts a year and probably missing the window for when they really need to make that decision if it's been triggered by an event. So um, strategies like that, where you have frequent email, frequent touch, just make sure that you're being entertaining, education, compassionate, and inviting them back to the site. You'll be surprised at how low your opt-out rates are on these sorts of things, and how much better quality that traffic is. The return visitors convert at 2, 3, or 4 times higher than new visitors. So you want people to come back. As conversion
Yeah.
optimizers, we love to get another chance to convert someone to um, uh, an inquiry or a virtual tour, as the
Mhm.
case would be these days.
Yeah, we do a lot with marketing automation. Most of our clients are on HubSpot, if you are on Active Campaign. And, on our forms, we try to keep our forms simple because we know the fewer required fields there are, the higher our conversions will be. It always amazes me when I go on a senior living website and this form is endless. It has like, you got to give us your mailing address. Like, I'm not going to fill out like my entire life history and give you my mailing address and have all of these required fields. So we try to keep the number of required fields as minimalistic as possible.
Mm-hmm.
But using progressive profiling, we're able to store that information and start building that profile, which then as they engage more with our content, we can be asking different questions. So we already have their first name, last name, email address, and their persona. Who are you? Who are you downloading this information on behalf of? So once we have that, we don't have to ask that the next time they come back to the website.
Mm-hmm.
And it gives us permission to autofill that for them, but then tee up a different question. So it might be, what's the most important thing to you in finding the right community?
Mm-hmm.
And then, for some people, it's lifestyle and amenities. Other people, it's socialization and activities, or quality care, or I need dementia support. Those are very different prospects, and we can't give them all the same generic content. So, being able to segment and highly personalize uh, the campaign, the education and entertainment campaign for each of those is going to be very different. But you have to have enough content to create 4 different unique journey sets. If you don't
Mm-hmm.
have it, then you're just kind of stuck being generic.
Yeah. And, again, the data helps you understand that. So if you're sending 4 emails or 5 emails to a particular segment based on something they've provided in a form, you can look at the open rates, click-through rates, and opt-out rates and see which of those 4 or 5 is working well for you. Move the most effective ones to the front, get rid of the ones that are not generating interest. So again, it's pretty straightforward. What I think one of the one of the mistakes we definitely make is put these very complex auto response series in a sophisticated tool like HubSpot, and then forget it when we
Right.
should be going in and saying, "Oh, what worked? What didn't work? Maybe we should add more to this. Like we have a high click-through rate on that 5th email, then we need to add a 6th and then add a 7th because we see that people are still engaged with it."
Yeah.
How frequently we should send. And regarding forms, just as for your audience's idea list, quiz style forms are working very well in a number of industries. We
Mhm.
have not tested one in this particular market, but you start off asking a question like probably the magic question of, are you looking for yourself or looking for a loved one?
Mhm.
And a couple questions on each one. What this does is it allows each page to explain a little bit about um, what this data is for, but around this data, educate them on the process a little bit. So they're going through and filling out a form, educating themselves, and they're much more likely, or our data is showing that they're much more likely to complete that than a stack of fields that look like something you'd find on the IRS's website.
Right. Yeah. And I think at the end, there's got to be a deliverable of value, right? At the end of that process, you got to give them something in return for taking the time to go through that.
Yeah, well, and sometimes the thing of value is a conversation with someone who can answer questions live on a phone call
Yeah.
with them. And if so, that's what your form needs to be built up against. Like, we find people are, and here's why we're asking for this. And on your call, you'll have this question answered if we just know the answer to this question. And
Mhm.
so I'm going through the process, and I'm again understanding what it's going to feel like to get through the process and have that conversation, or watch that video tour.
Yep. That's great. No, I think the more ways we give people to engage. I mean, some people like live chat, they're going to click on that chat button because they've got a burning question and they don't want to click through your website for 5 minutes to find it. They're like, oh, here's chat. I'm just going to ask them about availability or pricing, or, what do you take my insurance, or whatever, whatever
Yeah.
their question is. Right. Um, and some people aren't. Some people are going to read blogs, some people are going to download ebooks, some people are going to watch videos. So
Mhm.
do you feel like, to really keep people engaged and to increase conversions, that it's kind of our job to give our prospects a variety of engagement tools and then kind of get out of their way? Or do you feel like we need to be a little bit more directive with the journey? I've kind of heard people advocating for both.
Yeah, well, I think at the beginning you're going to want to try a number of things, whatever your budget allows you to produce in terms of offerings. And then as you again look at the data for which are performing the best, so of the people who came to the site, a certain percentage of them, let's say, downloaded this report or this buyer's guide. Um, how many of those came back and ended up requesting a sales call? How many of those came back requesting some sort of a tour? And as you see what works and what doesn't, you pair it out. Things that work, you say, can we make this better? Can we add more to this? And so you end up um, testing your way into these streams of engagement that work best for your different segments. So the the downside of having a lot of options is that choice is really very can be very overloading. If I have too many choices, then our cognitive ability becomes depleted, and we shift to our automatic systems, and oftentimes those systems say, let's just leave. We don't
Yeah.
want that.
Yeah. Sometimes I get to a website and it's so busy, I don't know where to look.
Yeah. Visual
There's like,
hierarchy. That's the designer's job, is to create a visual hierarchy that guides my eye to the things I should pay attention to.
yeah. So from a conversion standpoint, um, are there certain things that people should keep in mind, or are there like your top three things that you would recommend? Like I recently heard, if your website is mostly a cool palette, that the call to action, buttons and things should be in a warm palette, for example, so that your
Hmm.
eye, it has all this cool palette in front of it, but it really is going to be attracted to the thing that's contrasting to that. So do you have any advice around kind of visual design or navigation?
Yeah. So, when you're coaching your designers, you're not asking them to produce something that is creative and beautiful, although creative and beautiful will convey a certain credibility to your visitor.
Yeah.
They need to work more like a draftsman. So, are the page designs making it very clear that I should start here with the headline, do a scan of the navigation bar so I understand that I'm in the right place?
Yeah.
The 8-second rule is a little bit unfortunate, because you have 8 seconds to answer two questions. Am I in the right place? And why should I explore further? And that can be easily done with, in the top of any given page. Once you've established that, you have them for as long as you're interesting.
Yeah.
So our attention spans are a function of, am I in the right place? And is there a good reason for me to stick around? Your designer needs to make sure that they get that they see which section they need to read next, which that they can scan through and identify which sections are of interest to them. If there's a specific need for dementia care, then there needs to be a headline that mentions that, and I know to read that paragraph, and that the calls to action are at the top of the hierarchy, so that on any page it should be very clear that we're asking them to do something in their best interest.
Right.
So that's really important. There's a lot of sites still using stock photography,
Yes.
so I'm not going to get a good feeling of what it's like to interact with your patients, with your staff, with stock photography, happy people, walking in the park and things like that. So
Hmm.
I would encourage on the images that if you can't write a caption for your images, and every image should have a caption either below it or in the image, that doesn't make sense, then it's probably stock photography that's not working for you. Get pictures of your staff, get pictures of your residents, and those should be on the site. Even if the quality of the photography is a little bit lower, our eyes know when we've got stock photography in front of us.
Yeah. especially when the people that we're showing are 20 years younger than our residents and
Hmm.
don't reflect them at all. I think we just try to be so aspirational about, the type of lifestyle and engagement that we want our residents to have. And it's easier to find that sometimes in stock photography.
Yeah. Well, and we want those that would not be happy at our facility to go away. We want them to leave the site. There's
Mhm.
certain segments that we do not want to attract. And it was like, oh, wait a minute, how do we know? How do we know? Well, if you're doing a good job of communicating what that feeling is like, what that experience is like, the right people will be coming in.
Yeah. So let's take a minute now and just kind of finish up around mobile. So, we used to be like mobile responsive and now we're like mobile first. And, what does that mean in terms of, how we should be thinking through design? Everyone wants the pretty site, but then that slows it down, and load time and speed time is so critical.
Yeah.
And the majority of our people are engaging on mobile. At least for our clients, we're finding anywhere between 60 and 70% typically.
Yep.
So, what does that mean, and what should we be doing differently, Brian?
Well, what it means is, first of all, that's the first thing you should ask your team for is what percentage of our traffic is mobile?
Yeah.
Uh, is it growing? The answer to both those questions will be, like you said, between 50 and 70%. And
Mhm.
yes, it is growing, especially during the pandemic,
Yeah.
um, which has put a little bit of an interesting spin on our data. Um, and how many of those mobile visitors are taking action? So typically, we'll design the desktop site. Even our design agencies will design a desktop site, say that it's mobile responsive, and all that means is that it shrinks down really nicely to the small screen.
Yeah.
But the truth is that when we're on our mobile device, we are in line at the bank, we are waiting for a table, we are sitting in our living room, not that lean forward, I'm at my desk and I'm checking this out in between work projects.
Yeah.
So we might need to change completely our conversion strategy. It may go from a desktop site, which can get people into having that call with a facilities manager, or um, uh, you know, downloading something that they're going to read on the page. Well, there's this one app that most phones have, and it's the phone app. So we find, especially in this scenario, that if you can take calls, optimizing on the mobile side for phone calls,
Mhm.
we've actually had facilities with a higher conversion rate on mobile than on desktop because we're optimizing for phone calls. And somebody's willing to call. A human being is going to do a far better job than any website ever built in answering that person's questions, managing their objections, and getting them to take the next step. So there's mobile first, and there's our approach is to treat mobile as a separate business altogether, a separate website, because it's going to have different calls to action, a different structure. It can flow from the design on the desktop. In other words, we're modifying what the responsive template designs for us, but we're taking out big pictures because that slows down the load time. We're adding maps to see, so they need to see
Mhm.
exactly where is. That's probably a big overlooked question is how far from my house is this? How, if I'm going to be
Yeah.
visiting several times a week, how difficult is that going to be to do on my lunch break and things like that?
Yeah.
So the mobile experience becomes very different. I do a lot of free consultations, and I'll go in and I'll start talking about their site, and I'll have it in mobile simulator mode, and people are like, "Well, this is the mobile site. This is not the site we look at." I'm like, "Well, according to your analytics, 70% of your visitors are coming on mobile, so this is the site we need to discuss."
Right. Right. That's
Um,
a great point. So you're not saying you have to start from scratch with a different website. You're saying you can modify so that when we know someone is engaging on a mobile device, it automatically defaults to the mobile view of that website. Or are you saying it's a completely different website that's only accessible on mobile?
um, it is changing the responsive template. So
Okay.
if your agency or your team is designing mobile first and then expanding that to desktop, that's a great approach.
Mhm.
But you know, when you do that, when you shift either from desktop to small screen, you're disappearing things, you're rearranging the way things appear.
Yeah.
And we're also saying you're adding like a sticky header or a sticky footer that has a call to action that includes the phone number.
Mhm.
You're swapping out panels that offer white papers in exchange for call now to get your questions answered,
Yeah.
things like that. The forms actually shouldn't go away. They become what we call conversion beacons. They draw the eye, but
Mhm.
the top of the form should always say, for immediate action, call.
Yeah.
If not, fill out this form. And in that situation, the big form actually works in your favor because more people that would call will actually click on that number and have a quick conversation. So um, it becomes a very different kind of site for a different kind of visitor.
That's awesome. Well, I so appreciate you sharing your senior living marketing perspectives with us. This has been really an interesting session. And if people want to know more, get in touch with you, learn about your services and your consulting, what's the best way for them to reach you?
Yeah, so we share all of our ideas on the blog at conversionsciences.com, conversion sciences, plural.
Okay.
And there are plenty of offers on there for you to sign up for a free consultation. Whether you think you're qualified or not, I'm happy to jump on the phone with you for 30 minutes and talk about what your conversion strategy should be, whether you work with us or not, and highlight some of the opportunities that you're missing on your website. So pop on over and fill out one of our forms.
That's great. And I'll bet you'll get in touch with us.
I will.
That's wonderful. Well, we'll have all of your contact information in the show notes. And thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure. I'm glad you had me.
Take care.
Bye bye.